right, folks, you know you're in for a treat when you hear that tune because it's time for another episode of the Rec Poker Podcast. So we got to thank our sponsors, the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, and website AMP. And I got to thank our listeners for joining us here. My name is Jim Reid. I'm Bluff Storini in the home game. I've got the best job in the freaking world. And if you want to find out more about me, you can go to rec.poker/crew because that's where you can learn about everyone on the Wrecking Crew. Or you could just listen up because you're about to meet a few of them tonight.
Well, I'm Chris Jones. You can find me 5B5 on Twitter or 5x5 on PokerStars home game.
And I'm John Somsky. I'm Poker Geek MN everywhere.
I'm Rob Washam, and I'm Rabman50 just about everywhere.
Hi, everybody. My name is Woody Adams. I am Rocket Box on PokerStars Pennsylvania and at Woody Adams on Twitter.
Right on. And just like every week here on the forums edition of the Rec Poker Podcast, any premium members are welcome to join. Tonight, we've got John Crowell, and John's been an active member in the forums here at Rec Poker. He's been on the show a few times. And we're also joined for the second week in a row by the one and only Tommy Angelo. So all you premium members who are listening at home, this is why you got to show up to the forums edition every once in a while because you never know who's going to come around. So, Tommy, thanks for coming back. We're going to talk about another hand today and get to know what's going on inside that poker brain of yours.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Fun time.
Oh, we love it. So last week we were talking about sort of playing more aggressively, playing a wider range of hands, looking for good bluff spots that aren't those sort of like lock of the weeks that you get to just count on 100%. It's such a cool thing to be talking to you as you explore. I think you said turning over an old leaf again.
Yeah.
That's too perfect, man. I love that. I love that. And you're playing at the Oaks, which, from what I understand, is also Eric Ginn, Binkley, his home casino. So that you might have stumbled across Eric Ginn.
Hold on, let me look him up. Hey, Eric, who?
Yeah, Ginn. He's a member of our Wrecking Crew here.
What do you mean,
Ginn.
Binkley?
That's his player name, Com Binkley. That's
Eric
his username.
Poker. Let me see if he shows up.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. He's a regular. He's also a world famous skydiver. So Eric's got a lot going for him. I don't know.
Yeah, I've seen Eric around. I think he came when Lee Jones and I, when we were doing our Poker Simple videos.
Yes.
We did a mug.
Oaks,
and he came.
Right on. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I think that's in his backyard. Well, he's a great guy. And I think my man Jamel Cuevas is also going to be making a trip out to play at the Oaks sometime this fall. So look live. If you see some Rec Poker gear, you've probably got some fans looking to connect. That's awesome. That's awesome, Tommy. That's awesome. All right, so let's talk about some of your experiences there. You've been playing live. We talked a bit about sort of an earlier spot where you could play out of position really aggressively against certain players. What other kinds of hands have you been experiencing lately, or what's piqued your interest as you've been tickling the felt?
Yeah, well, I've as we went over last time, I've basically raised the aggressiveness and the number of flops I've seen significantly since I started playing at Oaks and was introduced to some concepts. The game there it's technically a 2-3-5 game. They use 3 blinds here, and it's voluntary winner straddle. So everybody every day does a winner straddle on every hand, no matter how many tables. That's why it's a 5-10 game. That's why I'm playing. Right?
I see.
And it's a Mississippi straddle.
Okay, so for some of our audience,
left of the $10 straddle. What's that?
Okay, so the winner straddle, does that mean that whatever position they're in at the time that they won the previous hand, now they have the option to straddle?
They straddle, right.
And you're saying that it's a Mississippi straddle, which means that the action then starts to their left.
Correct.
No matter of where the blinds were.
Right.
Okay.
Now this, my approach toward rules is I have no opinions about any of them. I just adapt to them.
Yes, good.
But if I were to rate rules in terms of which ones generate more profit than others,
yes,
this is really profitable.
Yeah.
Because every hand is a unique situation. Every single hand, which
Right.
creates more potential for cleverness and more potential for confusion and more potential for all kinds of silly stuff. So that's one of the things I love about the game. One thing I've been, during my steady, boring years of consistent, boring, reliable profit, my betting ranges were more narrow. Now I'm doing everything from min raising to squeezing for 100, like instead of 60, all kinds of stuff, can happen. And like if you're on the button, when people see that you're going to be on the button, that gives your raise even more weight. They're like, wow, not only do I got to call this guy, but I'm going to be first, right?
Right.
So if there's like 6 limps for 10 and I'm on the button, I make it 100, like 100% of the time. Stuff like that. I'm just taking the guesswork out of it. The only other hand I wrote down was one. This one has all kinds of interesting strategic ramifications.
Cool.
And I just wrote it down, because it felt kind of interesting. I had pocket eights. It has several aspects of this hand or things that come up a lot that I think I do pretty well. One of them is if I'm the pre-flop aggressor and there's one overcard, I don't let go. I always bet the flop. And I don't, and in the old days, I would then maybe check the turn. But now I'm barreling again because I'm really finding that people are going to even fold that top pair often enough when they do happen to have that. Because they limped in or whatever, it's like they don't have ace queen. They probably have, when the queen comes.
Yeah.
So this hand, I had pocket eights. I made it 40. And I was going to be first act after the flop. Now, the guy that called right behind me was one of the guys I mentioned in the previous video. Fairly tight, fairly predictable reg. Now, when I say that with great respect. This is a guy who makes his living playing poker. Anybody that can pull that off, great. Don't have to be the most creative player in the world when you're playing against a really soft field.
True.
So he plays this more like how I did, right? He just takes it easy. So, and he gives me a lot of respect before the flop. And so, which affects my range analysis of him. So he called, another guy called. Flop was 9-3 deuce with 2 spades. Okay, and I have pocket eights. So I bet out 80, which was the determined amount I knew I was going to bet, 2/3 pot. And he hemmed around for a little bit and called. Okay, so now his range is 10s, jacks, queens, ace, king, or ace, queen suited if it happens to be spades. Could he have 10 nines? He was, wait a second, it was a blind. Yeah, he was in the cutoff. Okay, so he had some positional stuff going for him.
Yep.
Would he call my 40 with 10-9 suited there? I think he might. I'm looking at the bottom of his range right now. Where is it? Ace-9 suited? I think he might. Okay. Yep. So those are the only hands he could have. If he has a 9 and I continue the turn, is he going to lay it down and put me on 10s, jacks, or queens? I think he will. Often enough. Okay. So I bet, I should have written all this down. So I bet 80 he called. So there's 160 plus 120, 260 in the pot.
280.
I don't remember what the turn card was. Because, I remember the key part of the hand. The key part of the hand now. Yeah, I do remember. The turn was a blank of some sort. But I remember the effective stacks at this time were 700. Okay. And this is what I'm thinking about is like, if he has the flush draw, I need to size this so that he's not getting the right price for the flush draw and that I'm putting enough pressure on him to fold a 9 or maybe even pocket 10s. Okay. So he had 700 left. So I bet 400, which is a little lopsided bet. Technically, you're leaving an awkward bet size on the river
Right.
But that was the right amount to bet there. I really hadn't anticipated what I would have done if he'd raised, which I'm supposed to have already done. But I just got the feeling he wasn't going to do that. So he actually called. He thought about it forever and called.
Ooh.
And the river came, whatever. I checked. He immediately checked. I showed, and he showed ace, king of spades. Okay.
Right.
Which is a very, very narrow part of his range. I mean, he didn't 3-bet pre-flop, right? So I don't think there's much we can read into, rating my play based on how it turned out. The main thing is that I'm betting the turn again in situations like this that I used to not against this type of player. I used to just say, okay, he's got a 9, he's got pocket 10s, I give up. So that's really the moral of that story.
Yeah, that's something we talk about a lot in our group. Actually, like bluff targeting, because people talk about value targeting. Like if I put a value bet out there, what's the hand that's going to call me that I'm trying to get action from? And I think when you've got a hand like pocket 8s in the way that you describe it, getting a 9 to fold is great. Like that's a valuable outcome that is worth investing some chips in for sure.
Right.
And then also, combine that with giving him the wrong price on a flush draw. He's really playing your game when he makes that call too, because you're not giving him the right odds, right?
Yeah, and I bet if we asked him, see, I've been playing spunkier, right? And these things get noticed. If we asked him, he would probably say he thought he had actual showdown value with the ace king.
Right.
That I might have just been pounding ace queen. And part of the reason he called 400 cold, and he got this part right, was that I was going to check any hand that he could beat. And he's right about that, right?
Yep.
And so his play, if it was basically hit the flush or hit an overpair or bust, he wasn't getting the right price. But I think he felt he had some showdown value, and I think he was right against my range.
That's a good point. Rob, I think you unmuted first. Why don't you jump in?
I was just going to say, you're talking about double barreling here. You're talking about you pick that continuation bet, and whether that card improves you or not, you're going to double barrel. And I think what we're finding in a lot of the games that we're playing today is the population doesn't believe continuation bets on the flop anymore.
Right.
So there's so many people that are continuation betting so often that they know they can't always have it. And so they wait until the turn, and we call it being turn honest. If you bet the turn, whether you get there or not, it doesn't matter. It's people think once you bet the turn, they're going to give you credit for having a hand, and now they're going to fold.
Exactly. I strongly agree. Yeah.
Great observation. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's all, anytime there's any kind of trend, you need to buck the trend. And bucking the trend is barreling the turn here.
John? John.
I had a question about that on just how do you decide who you're going to bet the turn against? Because I've been known to get a little aggressive now and then at the poker table, and not always in good spots, that I don't realize until after the fact. So how do you determine what makes a good spot or a good position to go ahead and fire that second bullet?
Well, the most important thing is the dryness of the board, in my opinion, right? So anytime we'll go extreme, if it's, king 8 deuce rainbow and you bet the flop, and somebody calls, all you got to figure out is, would they fold a 9 if you bet again? If they have the second pair, 8, right? Would they fold if you bet again, or are they just, let's say they got 9-8. This goes right back to the other point. Okay, people are going to peel one off with the 9-8 there because they don't trust the C bet.
Yeah,
we're talking about a board of king 8 deuce, so they got second pair, and to some extent, you got to know your customers. But I think in the long run, I mean, if you just with a board that dry, let's say the bottom card pairs or it comes a 3, I really think if you bet there like 100% of the time, and force the guy to call you with king 10 or whatever, and then it goes check check and you lose. If you are playing in a live cash game in a limited player pool, that money will come back around. in getting paid off more later. But back to your question, it's some extent it's who is the player. Some players are not going to be the ones that are just hanging around for a street to hope to get a free turn. And other guys are only going to call on the flop if they have something huge, and you just give up. But I think the dryness of the board is the key thing. It's like if the board starts out medium dry, like Jack 9 deuce rainbow, and you bluff at that, and now it comes to 10 with a backdoor flush, and there's 2 or 3 people in, that's a situation where I might just give up if I have absolutely nothing. But if the turn is an absolute blank deuce, I'm going to fire again every time. That's one of the factors.
Yep, I like that. I think that's something that we can all sort of study ourselves independently, looking at different flop textures and boards and thinking just about what are the scare cards that are going to come, what are the cards that are going to come in that are going to complete the hands that my opponent was drawing to, and then what are the bricks, and how can we act differently according to that, because that is one of the few predictable things of this game, right? That you actually get to sort of think about in advance a little bit. One last thing I want to talk to you about, Tony. Why, Tony? Why? That's twice. Oh God! All right, Tommy Angelo, for God's sake. Straddles. So this isn't something that people are going to encounter in tournaments. There's a few different kinds of straddles. You've brought up already how it affects the strategy of the gameplay of the day. So I think most people are familiar with an under the gun straddle, where the player to the left of the big blind puts in 2 big blinds, and then they're like the biggest blind, and the person to their left is now the first to act. So that's the most common straddle that people see. And that generally is, good for the game in a sense. Like, it makes the game play bigger, which means people's stacks are smaller, and there's more money in the pot, which means people are more likely to play wider ranges. But it's not a very advantageous position to put yourself in as the straddler, right? If you were to pick one spot. So do you play an under the gun straddle, like if everyone's doing it, and not otherwise, or how do you approach that particular?
Yeah, well, if everyone wants to straddle, I'm all for that.
Yeah,
especially going from 2-5 to 5-10, because it doubles the stakes. And those are my most comfortable stakes, is 5-10 and 10-20. So, but if it's just a regular old game, I'm never going to straddle under the gun.
Right.
The only time I might is if I'm a brand new player and I sit right down there. I've done that before, just a quick little misdirection play, to not wait one extra hand for the big blind.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't. It's not a profitable play.
Right. It's not. Basically. It's just not. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but the Mississippi straddle, I don't know how they do it in the World Series anymore, but I didn't go last year, but in the cash game where I played every single World Series a lot, they had Mississippi straddle voluntary. Okay. And it was real interesting because you'd have some games where there'd be like 3 of us straddling on the button every time.
Yes.
Only on the button. Right. And I've done a lot of analysis on that and thinking about it. And I really believe the profitability of that depends on my attitude, on just how bluffy I feel. Right. If I'm playing lockdown knit mode, I'm not going to do it. But if I'm kind of revved up and slinging, then I think it's slightly intimidating too if you're the only person in the game straddling and you do it only on the button.
That's true. When I was down in Vegas with some of these guys last year, there were a few Long Island iced teas flowing, and the button straddle was on. Trust me, the button straddle, like that's such a much more valuable straddle to the individual than the under the gun straddle. They shouldn't even be talked about in the same fashion.
Yeah,
you can sit down at the button for 2 big blinds, and not only do you get to act last on every street, but now the small blind has to act first pre-flop.
Right.
So the people with money in the pot, they're already out of the way usually by the time it gets back around. So that really changes it.
But if I had to only pick one seat to every straddle from, it would be the cutoff.
Okay.
Because this is what's beautiful. The button right away has to pay $10 or he's out. Right.
Right. Good point.
It clarifies the whole potential of the hand positionally right away.
I do like that. And so there, Woody's mentioned in the chat here that when he was growing up in the game in New York, they would call the Mississippi straddle only when it was on the button. But it sounds like, but you're saying that other versions of the Mississippi straddle is that anybody can choose whatever position to straddle.
Right.
And then what happens if more than one person wants to straddle? The
person who's out of position has the first choice.
Okay.
The worst position that's how they do it here. And I've seen that elsewhere. Yeah.
Yep. That's very cool. I like that notion of the cutoff, because then it's just like you really are kind of buying the button a lot, just like we were talking about before.
You find out right now if this person has a $10 hand or a $40 hand or whatever.
All right. That's fun stuff. All right. Well, I don't know if anyone else has any other questions for Tommy before we roll on out of here. I've really enjoyed this conversation about position and playing differently against different players and talking about the different kinds of straddles out there. That's something that I think a lot of our listeners should look into more because, like we said earlier, anytime there's something new or different at the table, there's an opportunity for someone to make a bigger mistake than you. So if it's something you can think about in advance or prepare for a little bit in advance, that's definitely going to be to your benefit. Tommy, most folks, if they want to connect with you, the best way to do it is to go to tommyangelo.com. Is that right?
That's it. My whole life is there.
All roads lead to Tommy from tommyangelo.com. All right, perfect. Well, I'm sure you're going to get a few folks that want to come by and learn some more from the Zen master himself. Well, thank you again, Tommy. This has been a real pleasure. And I know our audience is really going to enjoy this. Yeah, well, I hope we get to talk again real soon. And in the meantime, also thanks to John, Chris, Rob, Woody, John Somsky, Steve Fredlin for making all this happen. Running Aces Hotel and Website Amp. And you, the listeners. Thanks. Bye.